Oh, hi all, welcome back to the 1 minute farming videos and the strip down of the 1943 John Deere Model A. And in that picture there you'll obviously recognise that as being the crankshaft, the engine crankshaft out of it. I took that out this afternoon. It took a bit of fiddling out. Bearings were a bit tight in the housings, but we got it out in the end. It's in not too bad a condition. The mains bearings, journals are not bad at all, and both sides. And usually not on these because they are the first bearing to receive pressured oil from the pump. And then obviously that oil from there is then fed through the web to the big ends. Now the big ends do have a slight mark on them, as you can see in the picture there. And I've seen this before. It's the oil comes through, obviously through this hole, and I think what happens is that the oil feeds this side of the bearing. Because of obviously the oil comes out in this direction and then it smears across to this side, and so they do slightly wear slightly harder on one side, and the other one's the same. It just has a slight wear on the on what you would call maybe the non-pressurized side of the bearing, but I think they'll be okay. Certainly for this application I'd be quite happy to put all the bearings back in and just readjust them all. Yeah, the gear on here that drives the camshaft, it does unfortunately have a slight bit of wear in it. As you can see, the teeth are worn slightly. Well, they've obviously been running here but not further on, and it's because, if you recall, the end float, which is controlled by the flywheel down here, has never, well, obviously when I got the tractor there was a mile of end float, and what's happened is the crankshaft has been slopping backwards and forwards in the bearings, and by doing that it does take a toll on those gears. So it is critical to get that end float correct on these tractors, and you obviously get that by moving the flywheel down these splines, and via the bearing retainer and seal inside you then get a small gap. I think it's about 10 to 15 thou, and then you nip the flywheel onto those splines, and that stops to, well, gives you 10 to 15 thou end float, which is ideal. But obviously this one had, well, it had none. It had too much, sorry. It was just sloggering backwards and forwards. And it has taken a toll slightly on the thrust bearing here, on this side, on one of the shells, I've noticed down here. There's the bearing caps. And one of the bearings does have a slight wear mark in its, I'm not too sure which one it is. I think it's that one there, in that phosphor bronze face. There is a slight mark, so, which shouldn't be marked at all. This bearing here is the one that takes the brunt of the end float, and as you can see, that should be a nice shiny face, but it isn't because of this. Just the fact the crankshaft's been so slack in its bearings, end float wise. But no, I think it would all just back up, certainly for what we'd want the tractor to do. So yeah, it'd be okay. There's a little bit of pitting where the bronze bush runs inside the pulley, but it's hardly anything really. And that bearing race or track seems not too bad at all. So yeah, so that would go back in. I'd be quite happy to put that back in. Obviously with us removing that crankshaft, we have now got a very large hole. inside of the crankcase. So yeah, if I just go there, that might be better maybe, I don't know. So yeah, so there's the oil pump laid in the bottom of the sump, and looking across to the other side. I am struggling a little, well not struggling, I'll get it to bits, but I am struggling a little bit with getting the camshaft out. Now, I don't have a workshop manual for Model A. I have one of those, well, one of those IT manuals which you either love them or hate them. I'm afraid I'm the latter, of a terrible manual. But a lot of people do use them and they say they get on with them okay. But I just feel that the man that wrote those IT manuals, he once read a manual about stripping down an old tractor and just thought overall the same. Well, they're not, are they? So I'm not a great fan of the IT manual. It suggests that you just slide the camshaft out of the gear and it comes to bits. Well, unfortunately, it would do if it was a Model B, but with this being a Model A, which has proper tapered bearings on either end, the gear won't come over the bearing. So you're having to dismantle everything to get the camshaft out, which isn't any hassle really. You just take the follower bracket off, which has the followers in, and drop the oil pump out the bottom. So hopefully that will help, but I still think I will have to take one of the bearings off the camshaft to be able to get the gear off. As you can see, I've managed to get the outer race to move on this side, and that normally would be flush, but at the moment I'm just a bit fiddly really. So hopefully we'll get that taken to bits and get that out. I'll drop the oil pump out. I don't know if we can see that any better from here. There's the oil pump strainer, and underneath that is obviously the actual oil pump. The top of the filter housing there and the relief valve there with that extreme top part. Slightly better idea than on the Model Bs, where I think there's a pinch bolt there on the right. You'll slacken that off and then screw that bolt in and out on the top. Whereas with the Model B, certainly of this period, it was a threaded stud and a nut which locked it off. But you can see that, just see that flappy bit of metal there, just laid on top of the filter housing. There will be a spring between it and that bolt, which just gives you pressure on that flappy bit of metal, and the idea is that it just allows the metal to give a bit, and therefore allows the some oil to escape to relieve the pressure a bit. But no, a slightly different design, probably a little bit better actually, I think. Yeah, I've left the big gear on the side at the moment. I've left that on. I managed to wiggle everything past it. The reason I've left that on is because if this V8 conversion idea is going to work, I need to have some idea of measurements to make the new shaft. And basically, in the last video, my video was cut short unfortunately because my phone ran out of space, as they do. But basically what I shall do is if the engine's going to fit in line with everything when it's sat in, the idea is to make up two large new bearing carriers either side, and taper bearings for taper bearings, and it'd be a straight through shaft one side to the other with a beveled gear in the middle, and that's the idea. So the bevel gear, and there'll be a pinion sits in here which the engine will then pick up on. And so with the straight shaft I'll need to machine this end for the flywheel, for the clutch and the pulley to fit, and therefore using the pulley gear to then rework on the first motion shaft. So yeah, so I do think it'll work. I'm pretty sure it will. It just depends on whether we can get the engine to fit in those angle iron frames there without too much hassle. Otherwise I may have to remake the whole frame on the front of the tractor, which I'm not really wanting to do, to be honest. But if I've committed myself to it, then it might be something I will have to think about. But anyway, so the next job now is to remove the remains of the internals in there and the camshaft and camshaft gear and followers. And then finally to remove the actual engine block. And once we've got all that cleared, we can then sit the V8 into the frame, roughly, obviously very roughly, and just see how things are going to look and line up. But if I've done my measurements right, I think the only thing we're going to struggle with initially is going to be the starter motor, which will be on this side for the V8. Anyway, there we are, that's where I've got to. So yeah, so okay then, thanks for that now. Okay, bye.